Thank you very much, Ben, and ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world, a good morning or a very good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to introduce this first session. Today's conference and this first session more particularly, we'll look into how quickly AI is expected to develop and what regulatory response is necessary to ensure that the development of AI benefits society. And we will analyze how various parts of the world address the challenges of regulating AI, from the European Union's proposal for the AI regulation to the US and China's regulatory initiatives. As you know, a few weeks ago, the European Commission published its 2021 Strategic Foresight Report, emphasizing that strengthening the capacity of Europe also on artificial intelligence is a top 10 strategic priority and part of EU's digital sovereignty agenda. Now, in this session, we will also try to navigate complex issues of data governance, of privacy and data protection in relation to AI. But as you said, and the previous speakers have stated, the challenges represented by AI and also data privacy and security do not know any national borders or any nationality. And this is why I think global and regional collaboration in addressing these challenges is really key. And it's a particular pleasure for me and an honor, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce you to our speakers or the members of the panel for today in this first session. And I would like to start with introducing Monsieur Jean-Pierre Raffarin. Mr. Raffarin was appointed Minister of Small and Medium Enterprises, Commerce and Craft from 95 to 97, and also served as French Prime Minister from May 2002 until May 2005 by President Jacques Chirac. He was also elected Senator of Vienne from 95 to 2017 and Vice President of the Senate from 2011 to 2014. And from October 2014 to July 2017, he was President of the Foreign Affairs, Defense and Armed Forces Committee of the Senate. And Mr. Raffarin is also the author of a number of books, including Ce que la Chine nous a appris, et Chine, le grand paradoxe pour le réveil de l'Europe. And it's, of course, an honor, Mr. Raffarin, to have you amongst us today. I would also like to introduce Mr. Wu, Chairman of the Board of Directors of CAS Holdings since June 2014. Mr. Wu is joining us from Beijing, and he has been the Chairman of the Board of Directors and the Executive Director of Biosino Biotechnology and Science Corporation, a Hong Kong listed company. And then I would like to move to introduce you to Mrs. Irina Orsic, Head of Sector AI Policy at the European Commission, who will indeed shed light on the choices made by the European Commission in formulating the proposal and on the next steps contemplated by the Commission in reviewing its AI policy. We have also Mr. Ventsislav Karachov on the panel, the former President and Chairman of the Bulgarian Commission for Personal Data Protection since April 2014, and currently the Deputy Chair of the European Data Protection Board. And Mr. Karachov also served 2 terms as Vice Chair of the Article 29 Working Party. And finally, Mr. Michaud, François-Louis Michaud, who is an Executive Director of the European Banking Authority, appointed in September 2020. Since March 2014, he had been a Deputy Director General at the European Central Bank. A distinguished panel, et je voudrais d'abord inviter Monsieur le Premier ministre de nous faire part de ses observations sur l'accélération de la digitalisation avec la pandémie. Monsieur le Premier ministre, je vous donne la parole. Je vous en prie.
Merci beaucoup de me donner la parole et surtout de m'inviter à cette rencontre, importante manifestation, à un moment où nous sommes quelque peu privés de dialogue. Je voudrais donc saluer cette initiative qui non seulement est un sujet majeur, puisqu'on voit bien qu'avec ces nouvelles forces technologiques, le besoin de régulation est très important et qu'il n'y a pas de régulation sans coopération. Donc merci de cette invitation. Je suis heureux de saluer tous les participants et notamment les participants à ce panel. Tout particulièrement, je dis un message au chairman Wu, Monsieur Levin, avec lequel je travaille déjà depuis un certain temps et que j'ai très grand plaisir à retrouver dans ce panel. Et je remercie aussi Didier Reinders, qui est donc commissaire européen, que vous avez entendu il y a quelques instants et qui nous fait l'honneur de parrainer cette démarche. Et je voudrais vous dire combien je suis heureux de voir les partenaires européens et les responsables de la Commission bien vouloir s'exprimer dans cette rencontre, car pour nous, Français, sur ces sujets-là, l'Europe est très importante et nous avons, avec le commissaire Thierry Breton, beaucoup de proximité pour à la fois développer ces technologies, utiliser ces technologies dans tous les sens positifs, comme on l'a vu par exemple dans les questions de santé avec la pandémie, mais aussi naturellement poser les questions qui sont très importantes, et notamment la question de la souveraineté, puisque cette pandémie a aussi révélé toutes les difficultés que nous pouvions avoir en matière d'approvisionnement de tel ou tel produit de première nécessité. Et donc, il faut essayer de trouver, avec les questions de régulation, cet équilibre nécessaire entre la coopération, évidemment, et la souveraineté. La souveraineté intégrale n'est pas aujourd'hui autre chose qu'une utopie, mais il est clair que sur un certain nombre de sujets, chaque grande force a besoin de souveraineté, mais on a aussi besoin de coopération. Et notamment sur l'intelligence artificielle, où les progrès vont à une rapidité exceptionnelle, nous voyons bien que nous avons besoin à la fois chaque défendre ses propres intérêts, mais aussi de participer à la coopération internationale. Dans ce que nous fréquentons aujourd'hui, il y a évidemment des tensions très importantes qui rendent ce monde très dangereux. Et donc, je crois qu'il faut bien avoir en tête que aujourd'hui, nous ne sommes pas dans une situation internationale apaisée et que tous les efforts que nous faisons les uns et les autres pour essayer de maintenir des hauts niveaux de coopération, pour essayer d'améliorer les questions de régulation, on voit bien que nous faisons ça dans un contexte qui est un contexte extrêmement tendu. On parle beaucoup de la tension entre les États-Unis et la Chine, mais on voit bien qu'il y a beaucoup d'autres tensions aujourd'hui dans notre monde et que notre monde, sans doute, est un monde qui connaît moins la coopération qu'il n'a pu le connaître dans le passé. Et quand je vois la crise de 2008 et que j'observe les réactions multilatérales, je me dis que le multilatéralisme a été bien faible dans cette grande pandémie que nous continuons d'affronter. Et donc, nous avons difficulté à construire des actions communes, et même si le virus, lui, ne respecte pas les frontières, nous nous sommes trouvés les uns et les autres dans une sorte d'isolement national où chacun trouvait des réponses à ces questions, avec certes, heureusement, des coopérations. On en a eu sur les masques, on en a eu sur les vaccins, mais au total, le niveau de coopération, le niveau de multilatéralisme a été globalement plus faible que pour la crise financière de la fin des années 2008 et 2010. Donc, monde extrêmement dangereux et donc monde qui connaît actuellement cette double accélération, accélération des tensions et accélération des technologies. c'est-à-dire au fond accélération des tensions et accélération des besoins de coopération. Et ça, je crois que c'est quelque chose de très important à bien avoir en tête, surtout qu'au fond, les technologies, la pratique, mais aussi la conception des technologies aujourd'hui est beaucoup plus rapide que ne peut l'être la régulation. Et donc, dans cette course de vitesse, les innovations l'emportent sur les régulations. Et donc, il faut toujours, et c'est pour ça que le dialogue entre nous est si important. On voit que dans ces tensions, il y a évidemment, donc, ce dont je viens de parler, les tensions entre États, mais il y a aussi, et c'est très important, naturellement, à l'intérieur de chaque grande nation, des tensions entre l'État et les groupes technologiques qui, avec ces puissances qu'ils ont constituées, sont des acteurs très importants et qui ont tendance, quelquefois, à dépasser le rôle de l'État et à faire en sorte qu'il y ait des rivalités, des conflits entre l'intérêt de l'État et l'intérêt de ces groupes écologistes, technologistes. Et donc, il y a là une question majeure que nous devons affronter, qui est au fond que chacun, dans son pays, a des sujets de régulation entre l'État et les acteurs de ces révolutions technologiques. Et on le voit aussi bien aujourd'hui en Chine qu'aux États-Unis. Tension entre l'État et les groupes technologiques. Mais aussi, il y a quand même des tensions, naturellement, entre ces groupes technologiques et les personnes, et les citoyens, et les consommateurs de ces services. Il y a naturellement des milliers et des milliers d'applications très positives, mais il y a aussi des questions qui sont posées sur l'exercice des libertés, sur un certain nombre de sujets qui touchent aux droits du citoyen, aux droits du consommateur, aux droits de la protection des citoyens et des consommateurs. Et donc, on voit aussi qu'il y a des tensions aujourd'hui importantes entre citoyens et groupes technologiques, et on voit le débat fiscal, par exemple, qui est aujourd'hui un débat très important. Alors, dans cette situation, nous sommes comme dans une sorte de cybersociété avec les formidables facilités offertes par les bases de données et l'intelligence artificielle et bientôt avec les ordinateurs quantiques. On voit qu'il y a là des possibilités majeures, mais on voit aussi un certain nombre de dérives et on voit bien, c'est très présent aujourd'hui en Europe, le débat qu'il y a entre le besoin de sécurité, le besoin de liberté, et que par le moment, on construit de la sécurité en limitant l'exercice des libertés. Et donc ça, ces sujets-là sont des sujets aussi qui créent un certain nombre de tensions, et cette dialectique entre la machine et l'homme est une dialectique à laquelle il faut s'habituer parce qu'elle va devenir de plus en plus importante dans notre univers. Et cette question-là, naturellement, elle appelle à un besoin, je dirais, un besoin de droit, un besoin de règles, naturellement, qui soient le plus possible des règles concertées. On voit que le droit est un équilibre qu'il peut permettre d'atteindre et qu'il, grâce à cette capacité de définir les règles du jeu, on voit que les technologies peuvent servir l'humanisme, c'est-à-dire l'épanouissement de la personne, et que ceci doit nous permettre, avec l'usage du droit, la protection des différents acteurs et, au fond, donner de la lisibilité à l'action publique, mais aussi à l'action industrielle et à l'innovation. Je crois que sur ces sujets, il est très important de faire un effort de lisibilité pour que les citoyens comprennent mieux ce qui peut se passer sur le plan scientifique, de manière à ce qu'il y ait une forme de compréhension collective qui protège d'une certaine manière les citoyens d'une évolution qui serait négative. Et comme la technique va plus vite que la société, il faut que la société soit fortement mobilisée pour qu'on puisse faire en sorte que finalement les technologies soient maîtrisées par le droit, avec cette difficulté que la technologie, elle respecte rarement la frontière, mais que le droit, lui, il est naturellement fondé sur une base nationale et naturellement sur une recherche de coopération. Donc là, il y a le besoin de coopération et d'inventer un certain nombre de règles nouvelles, le tout en associant fortement la société civile. Je pense que si le multilatéralisme connaît aujourd'hui un certain nombre de faiblesses, c'est qu'au fond, il est devenu une sorte de technologie institutionnelle qui est aujourd'hui réservée à des experts et que globalement, les citoyens, les organisations, les entreprises n'ont pas accès à toutes les informations nécessaires. Il est très important dans cette approche de régulation de l'intelligence artificielle, disons de civilisation de l'intelligence artificielle, dans cette perspective-là, il est très important de ne pas laisser le sujet entre les mains des seuls experts. On ne peut pas faire de l'intelligence artificielle une technologie qui serait réservée à un petit nombre alors qu'elle concerne chacune et chacun d'entre nous. Et donc, associer la société civile, associer notamment les plus jeunes dans la perception de ces questions très importantes, je crois que c'est un élément très important de rénovation de l'approche multilatérale. Cette approche multilatérale, il faut essayer de l'inventer, sachant qu'on est aujourd'hui dans une période légèrement plus favorable que celle que nous avons connue. Il y a encore quelques mois, avec la présidence américaine de M. Trump, nous avons connu un fort recul du multilatéralisme, puisque à l'époque, quand il y avait difficulté, un grand partenaire se retirait. Ce fut le cas au début à l'UNESCO, il y a déjà un certain temps, puis ce fut le cas à l'OMS, ce fut le cas dans un certain nombre de sujets, y compris pour les arbitrages de l'OMC. Et donc, on voit bien qu'aujourd'hui, avec la nouvelle présidence américaine, on a un retour quelque peu aux pratiques multilatérales. Mais sur ces sujets qui sont les sujets des hautes technologies, de l'informatique quantique et tout cela, on voit bien que notre organisation multilatérale n'est pas suffisamment puissante. Et donc, c'est un appel à un multilatéralisme de l'intelligence artificielle que je voudrais terminer cette intervention initiale. Nous avons besoin d'une coopération renforcée dans cette matière. Cette coopération, elle doit être multilatérale. L'action internationale, quand elle n'est pas multilatérale, elle apparaît toujours intéressée. Elle sert les intérêts de quelqu'un. Et dans cette compétition aujourd'hui des nations, dans cette situation dangereuse des relations internationales, nous ne pouvons pas laisser les acteurs agir seulement dans leur seul intérêt. Il faut aussi penser à l'intérêt global de l'humanité, au fait que nous sommes dans une forme de perspective de destinée qui nous met tous ensemble face aux mêmes problèmes. Je pense que c'est un point très important de l'évolution du monde international. Aujourd'hui, par exemple, l'idée de planétisation des consciences, le fait que nous avons à sauver la planète pour sauver l'humanité. Cette idée-là, elle est présente dans chacune des nations. Et au fond, chacun se souvient que le discours du président Xi Jinping, quand il signe l'accord de Paris, et le discours du président Biden, quand il rejoint l'accord de Paris, au fond, sont des discours qui ont beaucoup de points communs. Et donc, cette conscience de la planète, c'est une conscience partagée qui fait que pour humaniser la mondialisation, il faut protéger l'humanité en protégeant la planète. Cette vision-là, qui est une vision naturellement sur les questions environnementales principalement, mais autre chose aussi, toutes ces grandes technologies qui vont révolutionner nos pratiques et nos sociétés doivent être pensées collectivement avec l'intérêt du citoyen planétaire. Et au fond, c'est à ce citoyen planétaire que s'adresse aujourd'hui notre forum en cherchant le moyen de le protéger, à la fois qu'il puisse posséder de toutes les technologies, que pour sa santé, que pour sa formation, que pour son exercice professionnel, il trouve dans l'intelligence artificielle des soutiens, des développements auxquels on n'aurait pas pu penser auparavant, qui sont vraiment extraordinaires, qui nous sortent de nous-mêmes, qui augmentent la densité de l'humanité. Donc il y a des forces exceptionnelles de progrès, mais naturellement, il faut protéger ce citoyen planétaire par une conscience de relations internationales planétaires, c'est-à-dire par un multilatéralisme des hautes technologies. Voilà ma conviction profonde et je dois vous dire que je suis très heureux de voir qu'aujourd'hui, l'Europe, avec dans ce forum un grand nombre de participants en responsabilité au sein des instances européennes, mais aussi en Chine et dans un grand nombre d'autres pays, que cette réflexion-là nous pousse à nous rencontrer. Mon dernier espoir est de faire en sorte que bientôt on puisse faire ces rencontres en présentiel, parce que c'est comme ça qu'on défend quand même l'humanité, c'est par des rencontres qui doivent dépasser l'image pour aller parler directement au cœur. Je vous remercie de votre attention et je vous souhaite un bon.
Nous vous remercions, Monsieur le Premier ministre, de votre discours et nous sommes ravis que vous restez avec nous pour la suite du débat. I would like now to give the floor to Chairman Wu, who will share his insights, specifically from a Chinese perspective. Mr. Wu, you heard Mr. Raffarin's call for a reinforced multilateralism. So I would be very grateful if you could maybe respond to that call in your speech. The floor is yours, Mr. Wu.
Microphone. Parliament, Chairman of the Foundation Perspective and Innovation, Your Excellency EU Commissioner Vendors, dear friends. I was able to attend the first two physical RAID conference events in Paris. It's Pompidou Center, and I do look forward to attending RAID again in person. When the circumstances are now, it is so important that we all keep communicating and reach out to each in this period of disruption, and before we can meet again. So I'm very much welcome the chance to talk to you today, and it's this online leader event. It is necessary and positive that we find and use opportunities such as this to continue to develop our mutual understanding. I exactly agree to Premier Raffarin what he said, and it is my pleasure to follow Premier's speech. The theme of today's conference is regulation of AI, internet, and data, and I'm very glad to share my following 3 points with you. And first, the coming of intelligent society. I use 5 apples to conclude the development of a human intelligent society. The first apple is the apple of Eden, apple of Adam and Eve. It stands for curiosity, the human instinct for seeking knowledge, the original human wisdom, and the driving force of science. The second apple belongs to Newton, which impaired both of 3 laws of mechanics and the law of gravity. Bringing mathematics into various disciplines of natural science. It is a revolution of science. The third apple ended Turing's miserable life but combines computing with machine. The first Apple, Steve Jobs and his Apple company, opens an era of ambient computing, make computing exist everywhere, every time, anytime, and for anything. And the world's the fifth Apple. I think the next milestone will be the connection between computing and life. And the one is life digitalization, such as BCI technology, brain computer interface. And another one is digitization life, such as robot. And that's my personal thought about the development history of intellectual society. Second, Chinese regulations of AI, internet, and data. This year, with the purpose of improving the protection, safeguarding national cybersecurity, and the legitimate rights and interests of the citizens, Chinese government promulgated 3 laws and regulations: the Data Security Law, the Personal Information Protection Law, and the regulations on the security protection of critical information infrastructure. Among them, it is worth noting that the Article 33 of Data Security Law stipulates across-border data requirements, collect of personal information and important data. Operators of the key information infrastructure within PRC shall store all information and the data within the mainland territory. For all collected or data handlers within the mainland territory, if they want to export of important data from the mainland territory, they must consult or they need to have the approval from the State Council for security management measures. Third, embrace the great change. The title of time is irreversible. The story of Edison and Tesla is certainly familiar to everyone. We can choose to be the one who wears the hat of the king of invention, but hinders the development of AC electricity. Or we can choose to be the real leader of times, the innovator that affects the world. They are possibly 3 notes ahead of us. The first one is short-sighted, refusal to change, and will eventually be eliminated by times. The second is to adapt to the trend and enjoy the achievements of scientific and technology progress. But the third one is the best one, to meet the change of times. So, and I think I totally agree with Lavrent's points. And my point just expressed about 3 points. That's my overall share today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chairman Wu, for sharing your thoughts. And again, it's great that you are taking the time now in Beijing to join us. I would like to open up the floor for the discussion and the panel. Open up the panel discussion. And a first question that I would like to ask our other panel members relates to something that Mr. Raffarin emphasized, which is, the need to find the right balance in regulation. And if I think, yesterday the FT or over the weekend published an article on the Digital Markets Act, which indeed introduces for the first time ex ante regulation for very large platforms, the gatekeepers, and the article reports that there are kind of huge divides, even in the European Parliament, between certain members and parties who feel there should only apply to the largest platforms, and others saying no, it should be much wider in scope. Certain people saying all representatives, members of parliament, saying that only core digital services should be in scope. Others saying no, others types of digital services should also be in scope. So these topics are complex, of course, and there are, I think, also in Europe still deep divides about the I would say the direction of travel. Now, if we look at AI and focus on the regulation, the draft regulation on AI, which was presented by the Commission in April 21, it is, the ambitions are very high, and it's a very comprehensive piece of legislation, a very comprehensive proposal, the first in the world, regulating the use and marketing of AI systems, and which, according to many, will become the kind of gold standard, much like the GDPR has been doing for, protecting personal data. So, a first question to Ms. Orsic, please, because as a head of sector on AI policy at the European Commission, could you maybe briefly explain the approach that the Commission took to try to regulate AI, and what the next steps in the process will look like? Please, Ms. Orsic.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me here. So on the approach in general, it is based on a product safety regulation approach, which means that we are less regulating the use, but what we are doing is really regulating the product when it is put for the first time on the European market. And then we only regulate high-risk products. So that you already heard this morning in the opening statements, there are a couple of high-risk use cases which we pointed out in an annex to the proposal, and it is only that these would need to play by certain requirements. So again, this is an obligation which is put on the provider of the artificial intelligence system. And what we want to achieve with that is that we don't want to regulate a concrete technology, but we want to have safety and fundamental rights protection for certain of the users. So this is the approach we are following, high risk based. On top of that, a few prohibitions, a few applications where transparency requirements apply, and the absolute majority of AI system where we don't propose any compulsory rules, but where it is possible to apply on a voluntary basis codes of conduct, or also we appointed a high-level expert group, and they did a fantastic assessment tool for trustworthy artificial intelligence. So all this indeed can also be followed on a voluntary basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Orsic. Mr. Karachov, I wanted to ask you, the use of certain AI systems, and Ms. Orsic alluded to them already, indeed may pose serious risk to the right to privacy, to other human rights. From the point of view of the EDPB, where do you, kind of draw the line between promoting innovation and protecting human rights? Would be my first question. So does the draft regulation go far enough, or not yet, according to you? And secondly, a second question, how do we avoid, that when we impose requirements and obligations, businesses, organizations, adhere to some kind of tick the box compliance approach. You know, we tick the box and we can sell it. Whereas real compliance probably goes beyond, you know, this just ticking the box exercise. So how can we really embed such a concern to protect human rights, you know, in society and with the organizations which will need to implement the regulation? But first of all, does it go far enough, or not yet far enough, according to you?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. It's a very interesting discussion. But you have to understand that each answer is coming from the point of view of the person, and the data protection authorities, of course, are established in order to be able to defend the rights of the European citizens. The European individual should have priority, and that's why we're talking about data-centric AI. That doesn't mean that the AI, the technology, and the regulation should hinder the innovation this way, but we think that the GDPR, as it was well described, is technology neutral, and that's why the regulation should not aim on the technology, but of course the fundamental rights and their protection should be the priority. When we develop a regulation, we all have to understand that the person should be in front of the technology. The technology should serve the person, and the benefits that we have should be well balanced towards the protection of our privacy. So from that perspective, I would say the technology should understand the main principles: privacy by design and then by default. At the moment that they meet this criteria, this principal criteria, at the moment that they start thinking of innovation, of development of new services in the digital area, the privacy should be the centric of their way of developing the technology and achieving a quality of the service. And then if the developers are meeting this criteria, they are educated in advance, they are trained in advance how to achieve it, that I'm sure that we are gonna talk less about challenges, about issues that may lead to unbalanced processing of personal data towards achieving the business purposes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And do you think, you know, I've read that at the United Nations level, the High Commissioner for the Protection of Human Rights argue that there should be some kind of human rights due diligence performed during the entire life cycle of an AI system. Is that an instrument that you think would be appropriate from your point of view?
I think we have to develop a certification process, but it will be very difficult that we do due diligence through the life process of technology, because the data protection authorities does not dispose with these human resources and high level knowledge in order to do it on a day-to-day basis. You know, we can do once or maybe twice a year a kind of a review based on cases or on specific thematic supervision on the software, for example, that is used for processing of personal data to deliver service. But it's not possible. That's why we see accusation for, let's say, not very effective implementation of the regulation. It is not, I would say, not effective implementation from the protection authorities, but it's because we have a limited resources, and within these limited resources, we can do our best right now. It is everywhere like that. It's in the business, it's in the government sector. Of course, I do not exclude the supervision, and the supervision should exist. It is useful because it is giving a different perspective from a point of view of a supervising authority to the perspective that, for example, the developer have had in their mind when they are developing that new service, for example, with a maybe innovative approach. It is everywhere like that. That's why we have external audits and internal audits in a company, because the internal audit is giving you one perspective, but the external is giving you the different perspective that you may not thought about previously.
Yes, thank you so much. I'd like to move to Mr. Michaud. Mr. Michaud, the financial services industry is probably one of the largest users of AI, potentially in building profiles of customers or developing new payment systems, innovative payment systems, or assessing creditworthiness of particular groups of consumers. Is there a risk, of creating some kind of financial exclusion in certain ways of groups of customers in your industry? And if so, do you think the draft act addresses that concern, or is there any additional guidance specifically for financial services required?
Thank you very much, and good morning, all. Very happy to be this morning with you on this essential topic, or very critical topic, I'd say. As you say, for the financial sector, this topic has a special meaning. Why is that? Because financial intermediaries are essentially about dealing with asymmetries of information. So information is the essence of their business, and it's very obvious that with artificial intelligence, they can substantially boost the capacity, their capacity to acquire, to analyze, to use information. And this means more sophisticated business decisions, potentially, for credit origination or for investment. But this also means better risk management, potentially. They could mitigate much better the risks if they would do it right. So this is a topic which has potentially implications for financial firms, both from a front office, medium office, or back office perspective. So the entire organization can be potentially affected in a good sense or in a not so good sense. Indeed, there are three main aspects that one we need really to think about when it comes to artificial intelligence for financial firms. The first aspect is input data. What kind of input data are we using? How do we collect them? Where is it found? In which conditions is it collected, and so on and so forth. The second essential dimension is the engine used. What's the technology? What are the algorithms used? Who developed that? What was the purpose? What were the parameters? What was the thinking of the people who developed those algorithms? What were their targets? And the third dimension that one needs to keep in mind is the use of the outcome. How does that influence the business decisions? How does that influence the risk management decisions? So in other words, and to make it very clear and simple, artificial intelligence has a fantastic potential for financial firms. That's really at the essence of what they do, but it needs to be used in a very clear and clean, I'd say, control environment with a clear governance that's defined by the firm itself, and which should cover the design, the validation, the backtesting, and the reporting of those tools. Why is it so important? And you mentioned the financial exclusion problem potentially. Very simply, I mean, if it's not done properly, if those conditions that I mentioned before are not met, we could think of two potential problems. First problem is that a firm first may end up departing substantially from its strategy due to its use of AI, and it could even depart without even noticing or without noticing much. If AI tools, for instance, are used in a very decentralized manner in-house, the inputs and the outputs may incrementally not fit at all within the firm's official strategy, risk appetite, and so on. I was mentioned yesterday of a bank that uses more than 80 artificial intelligence models, at the level of the desks by the operators, without a good control system in place. So the risk department or even the top management of the firm was barely aware. Of course, they now regain control. So the end of the story is a positive one. But the second externality is that there could be system-wide problems. I mean, that could be for individuals themselves, but also at the level of corporations, or even at the level of states. If data protection rules, we've heard that before, are breached, or if certain categories of customers end up being excluded as a result of the use of AI model used for the distribution of financial services and products, that would mean a huge collective cost. That's big for the society itself, of course, but that's also potentially damaging for the firm. I mean, if its reputation is damaged and if the firm faces mass litigations. So from a micro as well as a macro perspective, we could end up facing significant issues. And of course, so there are also all the opportunities I was mentioning in the first place. So in Europe and at the global level, I mean, the financial legislation is clearly committed to taking a balanced approach to all this. There's clearly a trade-off between innovation and financial stability. One should definitely not be ensured at the detriment of the other. I heard Prime Minister Raffarin mentioning the need for multilateral cooperation. That's very clear also in the financial sector, both at a technical level in the context of the Basel Committee for banking, as well as in the context of financial stability board and the G20 across sectors. And there's also a lot of bilateral cooperation between the EU institutions and other jurisdictions. So there are indeed important opportunities and important risks. And I think there are probably three main principles that need to be applied. One is that the same rules need to apply to the same activities and the same risks. Secondly, that the approach should be proportionate. I heard you say there's a big divide. Let's say there's a lively debate in Europe about whether what should be the scope, what should be the level of detail, because at the end of the day, it should be, of course, consistent and coherent, but also proportionate. And thirdly, and that was mentioned before, regulation should be technologically neutral. We should not, and it's moving fast, as we know, this technology, so there is no hope we can completely cope with the regulatory framework in time, meaning that we should be broad enough and principles-based enough in a way that ensures that there is enough stability, whatever the technology that's used. And I'll stop at that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Michaud. And I think you rightly pointed to the need already to, even before the new draft enters into force, to perform risk management reviews to understand the applications you're using. I've got maybe we have 8 minutes left in our session. A quick question, and if you could respond to it in 1 minute, I would be super grateful. The regulation is a comprehensive document, and I heard Mrs. Orsic saying, yes, but it takes a product safety approach. Only the most critical ones are regulated. It still contains 85 articles, 88 pages, monetary fines and European and creates national bodies as well. Is there a risk that this is viewed as creating an additional cost for European businesses at a time when, if you look at, I think last week or 2 weeks before, the UK announced its policy paper, which kind of defines guiding principles and says we want to become the center of investment in AI. So in terms of, and the US is promoting, I think just over the weekend, President Biden said, we're going to issue a Bill of Rights. So guiding principles and an overarching framework, but without I would say, the more prescriptive requirements and processes. Is there a risk that there is a kind of a distortion being created that basically increases the cost for European businesses? Mrs. Orsic, what do you think?
We were really trying to balance the innovation and the cost against the necessity of having such a regulation. We believe that there is a necessity for a number of reasons, in particular, and there Europe might also be different from some other areas in the world. Trust is needed. So the people need to be able to trust the artificial intelligence, and it's only then that they're ready to use it. That applies to citizens, that also applies to companies. And we have heard many stories from companies which were really reluctant to start with it. So there is a certain need to do that. What we want to do is to standardize the requirement. With that, we want to limit the cost to a minimum, because with standardization, not only that everybody can participate in the process, but once it's standardized, this is comparably easy. Indeed, there is still an effort. We want to help SMEs, for example, with regulatory sandboxes, to make it also easier for them to comply with the rules, to do everything. And then as a last point, we believe that the requirements we are having, in a way, are the ones a diligent operator anyway would need to apply. So this might come, at least a diligent European operator. Again, this is because of the culture here, that trust really is needed. So we believe that this is something they would apply, and even if it is on a voluntary basis, it's like not that much of a difference. So therefore, yes, there are costs, but it's a necessity, and we are trying to help. Thanks.
Wonderful. And do you have any view in terms of expectation when the regulation will become effective? It took 4-5 years for the GDPR. Are we looking at 2023, 24? What is your best guess, if I may ask?
You're asking me for the crystal ball. So in the Council, we are intensively discussing with the member states. This is progressing, and the Slovenian presidency now still wants to have a first consensus text at the end of this year. Then the French presidency indeed will take over, and the Czech presidency in the second half of next year already is preparing. So probably with Council, this looks like a smooth process, though indeed there are a couple of contradictions issues. The Parliament is still in the process of appointing the committees and the rapporteurs, and it was yesterday in the news again that this is not uncontroversial. So normally we would have expected them to appoint somebody at the latest now in October, and then we thought we could have a first text also from the Parliament around Easter, which means that then Parliament and Council will go together for discussions, and indeed, so that could have been second half next year. Let's see how it goes with the Parliament. We still believe that second half next year we have an agreed text. Then indeed we have a transition period also, as I said, to get the standards in place. But this is a bit our perspective.
Okay, thank you so much. Very insightful. In the meantime, I think, Mr. Karachov, companies need to comply with what you mentioned, privacy by design, do all the things that the GDPR expects them to do, right? Is that a fair assessment?
Yes. I would like also to say a few things about the cost. Well, the AI need to collect data, and it collects all type of data, not only personal data. To the extent that AI collects other type of data, there shouldn't be additional costs, because the software or the approaches are the same. But when the AI collects personal data, raw personal data, not statistical data, anonymized data, and etc., then there are certain rules, and that's why the European Data Protection Board and data protection authorities are talking about observing certain rules, like privacy by design and by default. It's because we understand that the service should serve the interests of the individual. You don't need a service that is low quality and that is unlawfully processing your data. We have to understand that at some stage, people start requesting quality services, and the services that are not quality services, sooner or later, will be not considered credible enough for the individual to use it.
Yes.
You see how many requests exist to the big networks to improve the quality, to include privacy rules, and etc., etc. And they are investing because they want their service to be considered credible enough by the users, and that's why, and in this way, to make a better business. So I would say
Indeed.
that rules exist, and they have to be
Yes.
and business should comply with these rules.
Yes.
Because
Thank you so
otherwise
much.
we are producing something that is not useful for us.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm very conscious of time. I have more questions for Mr. Michaud and for Mr. Wu about, the Chinese government also announced that it would enact a new legislative proposal on regulating AI. But in the interest of time, we need to finalize this discussion. And I'd like to invite Mr. Raffarin. Monsieur Raffarin, vous avez parlé d'une adapted forms of multilateralism, des formes adaptées de multilatéralisme, du besoin d'avoir un multilatéralisme renforcé. Disons que on se met dans 12 mois. On s'est mis 12 mois, on a déjà avancé dans le multilatéralisme. Vous avez fait référence à l'élection de Monsieur Biden et le comité qui s'est mis en place entre l'Europe et l'Amérique sur data and AI. Disons, on se met dans 12 mois. Est-ce que, selon vous, où serons-nous dans 12 mois? Est-ce qu'on a un espoir réel d'avoir plus de multilatéralisme dans ce domaine important, selon vous?
Oui, je crois que dans 12 mois, on aura avancé sur deux sujets très importants qui ont été dits et énoncés tout à l'heure par un certain nombre de nos panélistes. Monsieur Michaud dit qu'il nous faut very clear and clean governance. Je pense qu'il faut réfléchir à ce qu'est la gouvernance claire et clean. Et donc, je pense que sur ces sujets-là, les consciences aujourd'hui sont au travail. Et puis sur l'autre sujet, we need not to forget the citizen. Et c'est la société civile qui doit être associée et la généralisation de la préoccupation dans nos sociétés. Et donc sur ces deux points, l'implication des citoyens et la définition de ce qui est une sorte d'éthique de l'intelligence artificielle, sur ces deux points, dans 12 mois, je crois qu'on aura avancé.
Je remercie, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Dear panel members, I was very privileged to lead this discussion. Mr. Wu, thank you so much for your participation. Mr. Michaud, Monsieur Raffarin, Mr. Karachov, Ms. Orsic, huge thanks. It was a pleasure to be with you today, and I thank you for your participation.